Well, hello everybody and welcome back to Down to Earth. Melissa and I are excited to have you joining us again today with Uncle Marty. Welcome, Uncle Marty.
Thank you.
Welcome back, Uncle Marty. We're really excited to hear the story you have for us today.
Well, thank you. But you had some exciting things happen this week that you were involved with as well.
It's exciting, but it's a lot of work. We're prepping for a refugee summer camp this summer.
Oh, wow.
So I actually work with a group of volunteers here in the area that work specifically with refugee families. And depending on the time of year and what's going on and stuff, we're working generally with between 35 and 45 Muslim, specifically refugee families. And a couple of years ago, we did a summer school. Had no clue what we were getting into when we decided to do that summer school. And unfortunately, we weren't able to do it last year due to several things, but we're heading in heads first to trying to do it again this year. And so it's been really cool just to see the response from the parents, because it was really the parents that came saying, hey, we liked summer school. What happened to last year? Will you please do summer school again? And my sister's heading it up this year.
Oh, wow.
So there was a couple of meetings with leaders of our volunteer group and trying to figure out, what were the aspects they were going to do. They're actually focusing the whole summer camp on some of the 99 names of God in the Quran to try and help pull out these spiritual ideas as well.
That coincide with the Bible.
That coincide with the Bible as they go through. And my sister's spent 2 years working actually with Syrian refugees. And so for her, this is something that's very near and dear to her heart. And she's phenomenal. I wish I had half the skill she does at making spiritual parallels between the Quran and the Bible and just helping to ask those questions, especially with kids. Like, she'll just be walking along and be like, hey, that caterpillar over there, does it make you think of God? I don't know how she does it. And it's not weird, it's not awkward, and the kids love her. And so I'm really excited to see how that goes this summer. But just seeing how we can help foster these kids who feel so lost, because in many ways they're Americans, but their parents are still Lebanese or Iraqi or Syrian or Iranian. They have their own culture, and these kids are kind of lost in limbo, but they're not American to their American friends. And so trying to both integrate and also find how their spirituality, just how to make that association between who God is and how do I live a godly life in this new culture, and some of the things my parents are saying or doing culturally just don't make sense to me. To me, summer school is a really prime opportunity to be able to help them find those answers and see who God really is.
Well, that's really neat, Melissa.
It's been busy. It'll be fun. I'm excited.
That's neat. And I'm sure you and your sister can kind of relate to them being in this third culture, growing up in the mission field.
My sister and I grew up overseas. I came back to the States when I was 18, and there were definitely some culture shock things for me, just being an American who grew up overseas. And so for these kids who, a lot of them have PTSD and are really struggling. When we first did summer school 2 years ago, a lot of the kids we were working with had just come over and didn't even speak English. So summer school that year was really focused on helping them learn English. And how can we help you learn manners? How do you stand in a line? How do you wait to take your turn? Just some of those things. But now that they've been here several years, we really have an opportunity to take the focus and continue to do science projects and talk to them about the world at large and hone in on some of their other skills, but to really focus on the God aspect, which was more difficult when you were really trying to help somebody learn a language. So I'm excited.
That's neat.
It'll be good.
Yeah.
God has great plans, I'm pretty sure, so it'll be fun.
Very cool. Well, Uncle Marty, what story do you have for us today?
Well, I was just on the phone actually with one of our regional leaders, and he works the area of West Africa.
Place near and dear to my heart.
Place near and dear to your heart, exactly. And he started in one country. He's been working with us since 2008. Then he started in one country, which wasn't his own. Then he went to another country of West Africa and continued advancing. Today we have workers in like 7 or 8 countries, and we have about 2 other countries in West Africa, including where you used to live.
Yep.
He's very eager to enter. He already has established work there, but we don't have people really on payroll. But we have quite a bit of people saying, come over to Nigeria and help us start working in Nigeria as well. So it's just been exciting to see every year how we've been able to enter a new country. And he actually met him back when he was in the seminary studying to be a pastor.
Your regional director met
the
this
regional
guy.
director,
Okay.
Yeah. So he was still studying, I think, in 2004 for the ministry. He had already been like a pastor, lay pastor. Then they sent him to study. And he came from a Muslim background in West Africa. And while he was there at Babcock University, there was a big youth rally. And they had brought young people from all across West Africa. And while he was there, he went to sing the national anthem of his country. And after it, this young man came and said, hey, guess what? You were singing the national anthem. My father's actually from your country.
And this was all happening in Babcock in Nigeria.
In Nigeria back in 2004.
You're making me just a little bit homesick, I won't lie. Keep going.
So while they were there at the youth conference, they became friends, and he was a little bit younger than the person I work with. And so he said, why don't you come in vacation when you go home? Why don't you drop by my country and visit me? And so he says, I'd love to. So they worked that out. So he dropped by his country on his way home. They spent a week together. They became fast friends. And they stayed in contact by phone over the years. 2014, there was a mission training for how to reach out to Muslims in the area, and he is invited by the local conference of this country where he is to come and do training. So our regional director, he goes on behalf of the request of the local field and some outside funders who come and they do training in the country of how to reach out. So he really gets gripped. At first he was very against it, and he actually couldn't even make it to the training. The country where he lives is a country in West Africa that the northern part are Muslims. The southern part of the country is animist background people and traditional African religion, and some of these have become Christians.
I'm going to stop you there for a second, because I know what an animist is, but I know when we were talking earlier, Caleb was like, what's an animist? So could you flesh out a little bit what an animist is for our audience, maybe?
For sure. An animist is someone who doesn't worship the Creator God, who worships spirits, the inanimate objects, might have still idol worship and so forth. So it's a traditional African religion. This country also has a significant Christian minority, but who come from traditional African religion background.
Okay.
And so after this training in 2014, our regional director, he calls his old friend, hey, I'm in the country, I'd invited you to come. He says, oh, I'm so sorry, I would have loved to, but my work didn't permit me. But if you would like, why don't you come and spend a week with me? And he says, well, I'd love to. And so he went, he spent a week with him and really encouraged him. Why don't you work full-time for your own people? He was attending an Adventist church, but everyone in that church came from the southern part of the country who weren't a Muslim background.
And he was a Muslim background believer from what you said earlier in the
Exactly,
story.
and there's very few Muslim background believers in the country.
So he had a unique perspective and potential to be able to actually have a foot in the door with his Muslim family and friends.
Exactly. So our regional director kept saying, you know, maybe God has called you for something bigger. Maybe you can be more than just attending church once a week. Why don't you catch this vision for reaching your own people? Think of what would happen. It will take some sacrifices. You can't invite them to come to church. Well, if maybe you were to do house church and you're not going to a brick and mortar church with the animist background people, and you started a home fellowship in your own home, and he started warming up to the idea. Within 1 year, by 2015, he's now calling our regional director, you know what, God's been talking to me. I really want to work for our people. Well, he said, why don't you step out in faith? So for about a year, he found 2 other Muslim background believers in the country that had been his friend from his local church. And so, at great pain to them, they said, you know what, we're going to make this big sacrifice. We're going to stop attending the church we've been going to. It doesn't mean we're not Adventists, but we're going to try to start a house church movement with my friends.
It does take sacrifice, because we were actually talking about this with the house church that we've been working on recently, training these young people who are wanting to start house churches. It really takes up your time, and it does take quite a sacrifice for your weekends, especially as well.
Well, especially if you're used to meeting with your community.
It takes intentionality to say, hey, I'm going to step out and make these changes. And I can't say for this country, but in Nigeria, Sabbath is an all-encompassing event. And so when you go to church from Friday, when you start sundown worship, until Saturday night, when you close the Sabbath together, there's programs pretty much every hour that are happening, and activities for people, and you're visiting people. And so it's a weekend event that as an Adventist you're a part of.
Well, in his country as well, it's very much a part of this, and he was very much a part of, let's say, the leadership team of the local church. And so it was a big sacrifice for him. The local church has been very difficult for them to understand the sacrifice he has made, because he is separated, and they kept saying, oh, come back, come back. And he says, well, if I'm going to really reach my people, I need to do something different in a lower key way. I need to be able to start a house church.
I need to have something in my home where I can almost invite you to come over for some food and just sit down and talk spiritual matters with you.
Exactly. And so for about 1 year between 2015 and 2016, he and his two friends, they started their own little house church, and then they just started.
And were his friends from the church, or
They were two. They were the three of them. The three of them left the church.
And were they Muslim background
They
as well?
were also
Okay.
Muslim background. And so the church that was all traditional African or Christian background, when these three, the only three Muslims left, it was very painful. And it was painful for them because, as you said, this is a whole day event. They had become culturized to the Adventist culture there. So it was a bit of a painful thing for them to leave. But within 1 year there, they start their first few Sabbaths, the third or fourth Sabbath, I don't know exactly which one. They said, we need to do something for our community. What can it be that will really help us reach out? They're living in the second largest city in this country, not the capital, but one of the second largest cities. And they're asking the question, what can we do? And two of the young men came from being teachers. They came from an education background, and he seems to have had something similar as well. And as they're talking and brainstorming and praying, what is the biggest need of our country? And it's hit them. There's a very big problem with education. There's a massive dropout. There's only about a 32, 33, 34% literacy rate in our whole nation. Only 10% of young people finish high school. Only 1% go on to college. And we're a part of that 1%ers that go on to college. What can we do for our people? And so as they prayed about this over the weeks, they says, you know what? What if we started on the weekends a literacy school for our Muslim neighbors, for adults, young adults, teenagers that want to get through, and we do tutoring on the side. And so they were first a bit shy about this, but one of them had a large living room and an extended place out under the trees, and they started this tutoring, and all of a sudden, they had 30 people out every weekend there doing this.
Now, finding, at least from my experience with working with refugees, finding the right material to use to teach ESL is really hard. Because I know we had to scour and ask people all over to find the right books to use. Most of us aren't trained to do ESL. These guys had some learning. So what did they use? I'm curious because it would help me.
Well, they first didn't know what to use, and they went back and forth. What shall we use? Shall we use these materials that are used by the government? What shall we use? Shall we use some stuff they had found on the internet? And then as they were praying about this, they got this feeling. One of them said, you know, why don't we use the Bible? And now this brought up a big discussion because they're in the Muslim part of town. All their people are that they've started to teach are Muslims. Now what are they going to use? And one of them said, why don't we use the Bible? And the other said, well, this is kind of dangerous. Why don't we gradually lead them to the Bible? No, one says, I think we need to start it right from the beginning.
Oh, my word.
And the two thought about it, they prayed about it, and they said, let's try. And to their amazement, there was no resistance. They told the people, they started reading them verses from Genesis, verses from the New Testament, and no one ever complained. And the more they went into it, then the people got this appetite. We want to learn to read the Bible. And the previous scriptures, as they call it, the Torah and the Injil. Now they've become really excited. And now they start contacting our regional director, his old friend. You know what? We really want to do this full time. We would love to give up our jobs because we now have so many requests. We now have for tutoring, children after school so they don't drop out because the education is so low and hard and the teachers are so underpaid. It's hard for you to actually pass your examinations. And we have so many young adults and adults that are wanting to have this. We could run many literacy classes just ongoing all the time. So my friend, he calls me up on the phone and says, Marty, you know what? If we could just have salaries for these three men, it would be incredible. So they could do this. I think they really could make an impact, and it would help us enter a new country. So by God's grace, someone said, we will do that. We'll take those three salaries. And they started off in the last 2 years, they've just been amazed to see what's happened. Now that team that were at first wondering, what can we do? Are we going to step out from our local church? What are we, resource material? They've had this big vision, and they keep saying we have this big vision. We have been seeing God do with the Bible is just amazing, and we would love to train our students that are coming out who have already accepted Jesus. We already have several house churches going. We would like to take these young people, if we just had 10 to start with. And we want to replicate what we're doing around the country. Literacy is highly needed. Start right here in the capital city, put several more centers just right from people's houses. People just crowd. We can keep crowds of 35 rotating all day long of people coming for literacy classes. And then in the evenings tutoring their children. And then talking about Jesus, starting home fellowships on Sabbath. And so they've just been begging, please help us take it to the next step.
So my guess is they're looking for more people to do the same roles that they're doing.
They already have people who are believers who they have trained. It would be quite easy for them to give the training materials, but with some small stipends.
How many people do they have right now that they'd
They
like
have
to have
about
go?
10 people.
10 people that could go full-time doing this.
They have 10 people, and this is their
Wow.
big vision. They want to spread the Bible through literacy across the country. And they said from those 10, then we can have 100. And it doesn't take much. It's a poor country with stipends of $150. We can have someone who's giving a real service to the country and also giving them the Bible in the process and starting home churches.
Killing two birds with one stone.
Killing two birds with one stone.
Wow. That's pretty epic.
Really neat.
Now, how did the people teaching the classes, how do they feel about what they're giving back to the community?
Well, it's interesting. We've been talking about how Jesus comes in and really shakes people's worldview up. And as they understand that they're a disciple of Jesus, that Jesus is their king, that they're living in the kingdom of God, they understand this mission. If it was Christ's mission, to come and set the captives free, that's also my mission. But there's something else that comes into play here is we see people reading the Bible for the first time and going back, what has this meant in the past? And it's this, we're a kingdom of priests and we're a kingdom of kings, how the New Testament talks about, and what does that mean in their everyday lives? It means we take responsibility. If I am a son of King Jesus, and we have this dual role of mediating for our nation, if we have this dual role of seeing a kingdom responsibility, this is what I've seen them from not even wanting to work for their people to now taking this responsibility and then now having this big, big vision. Something that I've seen that's been important, and while we talked about these kingly aspects of Jesus and what are these things, something else that is meaningful to the Muslim community in particular is understanding Jesus is a prophet king. What is this? And there's a term that's used in the Old Testament and in the New Testament in Hebrews. He's a priest after the order of Melchizedek. What does this mean within the Muslim community? I've seen it quite powerful. And the question we went back as we were working with these ministries was, what did these things mean in the first century? And what did it mean to the Jews in the first century when he says king after the order of Melchizedek? So we go back. Who did the Jews understand Melchizedek to be? And if we translated it, it's king of righteousness.
Okay.
And if you go to Jewish tradition, they understood Melchizedek to be Shem. And it puts a kind of a whole new twist on things when we see this.
So Noah's son?
Noah's son, Shem.
Okay.
Shem is still alive. If we do the genealogies, he probably even outlives Abraham. So, according to Jewish tradition, we can't prove it, but there's strong evidence from the Bible and definitely from written tradition of the Jews. They understood Melchizedek to be Shem.
When my dad got really excited about that, he actually made a bar graph and brought it to worship one night. He literally took all the ages of everybody in the genealogies and spread them all out so that we could see that Abraham overlapped with Shem.
Wow.
And so that there was that possibility.
It's very true. You do this and you see that there's this overlap. And so according to Jewish tradition, Shem has carried the birthright. Adam has passed it to each one of his sons. It's passed to Noah. Noah passes the birthright blessing to Shem. Shem jumps his other sons, and in the story when Abraham comes and gives his tithes to Shem, it's because he's honoring the patriarch of the family, and he's the patriarch of the world. He is the king priest.
And this is Jewish tradition,
This
correct?
is Jewish tradition. And so he pays his tithe to his great-great-grandfather, and now his great-great-grandfather jumps his sons because they have strayed from the faith, and he gives this special blessing to Abraham. It's not told in the Bible, but the extra biblical Jewish tradition shares how at that time Abraham is given this very special blessing.
That puts a new, unique twist on that. I'd never thought of it that way.
Yes, and so he then is a king priest, and he passes that patriarchal priest king of all the descendants of the world, he passes this to Abraham. Abraham passes it to Isaac. Isaac passes it to Jacob. In Jacob now, because his eldest son forfeits his birthright, Jacob divides that birthright. And part of the birthright is given to Levi as the priest. Judah is given the kingship part that will eventually come from him, and the prophethood just kind of wherever it appears.
Yeah.
And so, according to Jewish tradition, the Messiah would reunite these two lines, all these pieces. He would be a prophet, he would be a priest, and he would be a king. And all of this would be brought together. And so Jesus then adopts us into his family as a priest king of the order of Melchizedek. So now that gives us a whole brand new responsibility. We are operating under his royal titles of priest and king. And as we talked about before, Jesus comes from the right genealogy so that he can come from the line of Judah and be the king. And this person at the time when the Messiah would come, according to Jewish tradition, would unite all three of these offices back together. So then this puts a whole new understanding as our responsibility. And so Jesus says, and the New Testament develops a theology that we're adopted into the family of Christ. And so if he has this role in baptism, we are then baptized into this role of being kings and priests of God. So these two young men feel now this deep calling that they, as the beginning of being Muslim followers of Jesus who are starting a movement, they now feel this deep sense of responsibility for their nation as they're grafted into God's family. They have now a very unique responsibility for their people to bring them the message. And I've seen this happen over and over. As the new believers in a country, they now usually, God calls people that takes this deep, deep sense of responsibility. And as they understand, for a Semitic people who understand these genealogies and stuff as we talked about before, and who they are, they're now adopted into this family. They have now a royal responsibility, a priestly responsibility for their nations.
Well, I know traditionally here, I can't speak for churches outside of my Western culture, but what I've experienced is church, generally people come, sit in the pew, basically a pew warmer, and go home, and it's very cut and dry. This is my spiritual life, maybe one day a week, and this is my secular life the rest of the week. But if we understand that we've been called to be priests and kings, the rulership as Jesus was, then that kind of really changes the conviction of what we're supposed to be doing day to day. And the model of house church comes to mind when you're speaking of this, because this is kind of a movement where everybody's involved. And I think that's what church was initially meant to be.
It also reminds me of a video you shared at a Bible study almost a year ago now, the image bearer video, because it pulls out that same point. It was a video done by the Bible Project. I think you've seen it too. And they pull out that point that we all have a responsibility as kings, as princes, as princesses of God, to have that role and that responsibility. And I think we really do lose that.
We really do. And I've just seen this happen over and over as they understand these first century understandings. It just like turns people upside down. They sense these deep responsibilities. And I can just envision these three men feel this burden for the whole nation. Then they take it to another city. Those first believers now feel this priest kingly responsibility for their whole community, for their new city and the environments around it. And it just starts this domino effect. And as they take it within their city, then people feel this large responsibility for the next territory or the area where they live in. It's not just coming to church, it's not just coming to be a seat warmer. It's not just coming to experience the music or listen to the sermon. It's a deep sense of responsibility that now overtakes the person. And a lot of that is lost when you're sitting in a pew, but when you're sitting in a home, it's a lot more personal. You do a lot of strategizing, dreaming of what can happen, what you can do for your community. And many times we forget just small little things can start a whole stream moving. And big rivers start from small streams.
Yeah, I've started a garden. I mean, this is kind of on topic, hang with me here.
Yes.
So I've started a garden and I've been watering it, and I've noticed, like you were saying, just little things that we can move that make a big difference. And you're watering the ditch, and there's just a little piece of debris in the way, and you pick that up, and the stream of water just keeps moving. So yeah, one little thing, it might seem meaningless to us or very small, but that one little thing can make a big difference.
Absolutely.
It sounds like there's a lot of willing hearts and hands ready to work, ready to start this movement of literacy programs with Bibles as the textbooks to really make a movement happen in this country.
Absolutely.
Maybe we need to take a few minutes and pray about that and ask God to both lead these three men as they're trying to continue the work that they've been doing, and the passionate young people who are below them who are really wanting to try and also take this on full time. You said there were 10 of them,
10
correct?
of them, yes.
And maybe there's someone who God's impressing who might be willing to help sponsor one of these 10 people.
Well, that's our prayer, because they keep passing this message, please, please, we have this big vision. We want it to happen. And it can happen one person at a time. But if people were just to say, God's called me to help with one of these, $150 would do it.
Wow. You want to pray, Caleb?
Sure, let's pray. Dear God, thank you that we can be here today and just learning of the kingship and the priesthood that you're calling each of us to, and how that affects our day-to-day lives and how we can impact those around us. And we pray for the work in this country, in this literacy program. And so we just pray for further help in their efforts there, financially, and spiritual support for them as they're going. And thank you that you're coming home to take us soon. And in your name, amen.
Amen.
And we'll look forward to seeing all of you next time here at Down to Earth.